Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We're all about getting you the information you need without wading through hours of news and analysis.
That's right. We cut to the chase, so you don't have to.
And today's deep dive is a fascinating one. We're looking at a recent suggestion from former President Trump concerning Ukraine's nuclear power plants, and it's all happening as discussions about potential peacekeeping efforts are taking place on the international stage.
Yeah, it's a very interesting intersection of events.
Exactly. So we dug into a BBC News YouTube video transcript to get to the heart of this for you. And what we really want to unpack here is what this proposal actually entails, the different reactions to it, and of course, what it all signifies within the larger geopolitical landscape.
And it's particularly intriguing given the timing we have, this proposal from a former U.S. leader regarding Ukrainian infrastructure, and simultaneously there are these high-level talks going on in London with over 20 nations involved, all discussing the possibility of a Western-led peacekeeping force.
You bring up a good point there. The timing is interesting. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is Trump suggesting?
Well, the core idea is that the U.S. could take ownership of Ukraine's nuclear power plants as a way to ensure their safety. And this came up apparently during a phone call between Trump and President Zelensky.
Okay, so the U.S. taking control to safeguard these plants, but I understand there's a slight discrepancy in how this is being reported.
Right. According to the BBC, President Zelensky clarified that his conversation with Trump was specifically about the Zaporizhia nuclear plant, the one currently under Russian control. So it seems the initial suggestion was focused on that one facility, not necessarily all of Ukraine's plants.
Gotcha. So potentially a narrower focus than initially thought. Now, the BBC reached out to Paul Knott for his take on all of this. He's a former British diplomat with experience in both Ukraine and Russia, so he's got a pretty good grasp on the situation.
Oh, absolutely. Knott's insights are really valuable here. And one of the things he pointed out was the significance of this London meeting. He sees it as a really important step towards potentially establishing a peacekeeping force.
And I imagine that would be a pretty complex undertaking.
For sure. But Knott believes it's all about building momentum. If they can reach an agreement in London, it sends a powerful message to Russia. It shows that the international community is united in its support for Ukraine and that they're committed to preventing further aggression.
Right. A show of force, so to speak, but a peaceful one.
Exactly. And Knott also emphasized that those recent phone calls between Trump and both Putin and Zelensky are adding another layer of complexity to this whole situation.
Okay, so we have these international discussions happening, and then we have Trump's proposal, which I have to admit seems a little out of left field.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. When the BBC asked Knott about the idea of the U.S. taking ownership, he actually called it a little bit odd.
Right.
He even suggested that it might be Trump applying a business mindset to a geopolitical issue, which is a pretty interesting observation.
It is a bit of a departure from how these things are usually handled, and I'm curious how feasible something like this would even be, especially given that the Zaporizhia plant isn't currently operational, right?
Right, that's a key point.
Yeah.
It's expected to take years for that plant to be fully functional again, and that does raise questions about the immediate benefits of U.S. ownership. But here's where Knott's expertise really comes in. He stressed that even when a nuclear plant isn't actively producing power, it still requires a lot of very specialized maintenance for safety reasons.
Oh, I see. So it's not just a matter of flipping a switch.
Absolutely. You have to manage the reactor cores,
Yeah.
ensure the cooling systems are functioning properly, deal with spent fuel. All of that requires constant attention, and Knott's assessment is that Russia simply cannot be trusted to handle those responsibilities properly.
So in that sense, U.S. control even of a non-operational plant could be a way to prevent a potential disaster.
That's the logic. Knott believes the U.S. presence would be a deterrent against attacks, and they would be much more likely to follow the necessary safety protocols.
And that ties back into those discussions happening in London, isn't it? It's all about ensuring stability and security in the region.
Absolutely. Both the potential peacekeeping force and this idea of U.S. ownership are ultimately about trying to prevent the situation in Ukraine from escalating further.
So let's do a quick recap for our listeners. We have this proposal from former President Trump for the U.S. to potentially get involved with Ukraine's nuclear facilities, especially the Zaporizhia plant, with the main goal being to address safety concerns. But the details of how this would actually work are still up in the air.
Right, and it's all happening against the backdrop of these high-level international talks about a possible peacekeeping force. So we essentially have two different approaches to the situation in Ukraine playing out at the same time.
It's a complicated situation for sure. And it leaves us with a lot to ponder. For instance, considering the inherent risks of international interventions, particularly when nuclear safety is involved, what are some of the less obvious long-term consequences of proposals like this for global security and the idea of national sovereignty? That's something we all need to be thinking about.
It certainly raises a lot of important questions.
And that's what these deep dives are all about, giving you the information and the different perspectives so you can form your own conclusions. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.
Bye, everyone.